In this video, we're looking at utility programs again, and this time we're looking specifically at those programs that are involved in disk organization and files. So the first thing when a hard disk is made is that it's totally blank. It has nothing on it at all, and the computer and the operating system don't even know where to put the information when it's first bought, and this is called unformatted. So there is just no information. And what we need to do is to format the disk so that it has different locations available for us to place the information. And these different areas, which are boxes here, are called sectors. And so we run a utility which will format the disk and create these sectors. What we see here is the current setup of the computer which I'm using. And so you have this hard disk here, which is the C drive, and it looks like we've got some other hard disks here like system reserved. Actually, we've got one physical disk here, and it's been set up into different partitions. So there's one for recovery, there's a reserve partition here, and then there's the main partition here, which I'm using to store all my files on. There's another disk here, which is a USB hard disk, and this just has one partition on it with 465 gig available. Also, the format in which I formatted it is NT file system. Other popular file systems might be Linux file system or FAT32 and FAT16, which is slightly older. So when I format a disk, I'm telling it the file system that I want to use, in this case NTFS, and then it can create all of the sectors on that disk and tell that disk how it's going to operate with relation to the operating system. At the beginning, before I do that, I set up different partitions which act like they're different drives. They partition off the drive into different areas. So when we save onto a hard disk, what happens is we get something called fragmentation. And before we look at the piece of software that solves this, we need to understand what it is. So as I save into the sectors of a hard disk, one file may go over multiple sectors. So my first file might save on these sectors here, and my second file might save here. And this is not fragmented at all. This is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with this at all. And then my third file might save across like this. Now let's say that I delete my second file. That file in orange gets deleted. So it comes off all of these and it's deleted. Now what actually happens, it doesn't write over this when I delete a file. It actually leaves all those bits of information there. It just makes it available and says that you can now write on this area. Now let's say that I put a fourth file onto the system. So I start writing here because I've got some blank space to write over. But then I run out and I find there's another file here, so I can't actually replace this. So I now move over, and the second part of my file I start writing over here. And you can see that this part here is fragmented and not together with this part. And the problem with this is that the way hard disks work, where you've got a disk inside and then you've got a drive head, the problem is that in order to get from this part here to this part here, this drive head may have to move, and it might have to go to different sectors on the hard disk. And that can take fractions of a second, but with it constantly doing that, you can actually hear the hard disk moving and thrashing about, and it does slow down the computer. So what happens is you run a piece of software which is called defragmentation software. And what that does is it will move different parts to different areas. And so it will leave alone parts of the hard disk which are in the right place and which are not fragmented. But then it will look at this blue one and it will say, oh, if I just move the green out of the way, so if I move the green to the end, and then I've now got enough space to put the blue inside where it should be. And then it will probably copy back the green back into the same area as close as it could. And then it will delete off the area which it now doesn't need. And this is quite a lengthy process because it's constantly having to move files to other areas of the hard disk. It's constantly having to copy and paste the same information around on the hard disk. And the ultimate aim is that it doesn't have any of these fragments and it has one contiguous file or one continuous file. And that's what defragmentation does. The third bit of utility software that we're going to look at is file transfers. And there's a piece of software that does this called FTP, which stands for File Transfer Protocol. Now, to do this, you can use software which is drag and drop, or you can even use a web browser quite often. They have an inbuilt FTP client, or you can just use the console window in your operating system, which is what we're going to have a look at now. So what I first want to do is to launch the FTP client by typing in FTP, and then I want to give it the name of the server either locally or on the internet. When I press return, it tells me that it wants the username of the user, and then it will ask for the password for that user. So I'm now in, and I can type in question mark to get the available commands which I can use. And one of those commands is ls, which means list the directory and show me all the files in it. If I put in ls, we see here it's got one called dot and one called dot dot. Dot means the current directory and dot dot means the parent directory. So there's actually no files in here at all. I can take a file from the folder I was in when I started running FTP, and I can send that up to the server. So I do the command send, and then I tell it the file name which I want to use, which was storyboardexample.png. So this is an image which I'm going to send off up to that server. And then it tells me the port which it's opened in order to send that file across. And so it's now told me that it's done it. It's taken 19 seconds and that it's been going at 2.16k per second, so extremely slow. And if I now do ls, we see there's the dot and dot dot, and there's now storyboardexample.png. And in a very similar way, I could get files. There is a command if we look at the commands. So this command here called get, that will get a file for me and download it into the folder which I launched the FTP client. I can also do delete, and so if I delete storyboardexample.png, that will delete the file for me, and now if I look at the directory listing, then that file has disappeared. And to finish using this program, very simple, just type in bye, and that closes the program. And in the console, if I type in exit, that will close that window as well.